Thank you very much, Sarah, and hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for this kind invitation. Well, I think at first I'd like to maybe tell you a little bit about what kind of organization Finance Watch is. So I guess I'm a little bit of a different animal from most of the speakers of this conference, as Finance Watch is a Brussels-based NGO. However, actually yesterday Marcus challenged the fact whether we are a real NGO, as we have actually a proportion of our funding from the European Commission. And actually the story of Finance Watch is that we were founded following the 2008 financial crisis at the initiative of several members of the European Parliament who felt that there was lack of balance in advocacy and lobbying over representation of banks and companies, and that basically they felt they needed an expertise center, independent expertise center, that they could actually brainstorm with on various technical, financial, and capital markets topics to basically check whether banks and companies, what they say is true or not. and basically what we do is we provide research we also engage with policymakers. So basically my experience is actually in advocacy and lobbying in Brussels. And actually this is what usually Finance Watch does, is that we seek actually people with direct industry experience or through Brussels kind of engagement. So a lot of my colleagues actually, they used to trade derivatives or create derivatives, structure derivatives, or work in other departments of banks, or they were working in other various ways in the industry. Yes, basically we also have colleagues who engage more in campaigning, so this is a more true NGO side, I would say, in promoting the views. However, anyway, I'm part of the core research and advocacy team. Oh, and maybe actually just to, I forgot to mention the main point. What is really our mission? Our mission is to make finance serve society and prevent any future financial crisis. And actually, maybe before I go to I would say what I prepared here in terms of the presentation, I found actually the presentations of Irina and Ian very, very interesting. And maybe just one angle I'd like to add before I move on to sustainable corporate governance is that I think there has been a lot of fast evolution in terms of ESG, sustainability, and all those terms. And I think it was very interesting to hear an academic perspective on that, as my perspective is a little bit more from the EU regulatory point of view and see actually how those terms are evolving in the EU regulation and how basically also the understanding is changing in a conceptual way. And I think, for quite a bit of time, I think those concepts, CSR, non-financial information, ESG, have been in reality used quite interchangeably. And it is very true that I think ESG is a term which is very specific to financial markets, also incorporation of environmental, social, and governance factors in financial decisions making, but also in hardcore risk management. So what actually happens in risk management departments of companies and banks. And which basically is an area, especially in terms of hardcore risk management, the reality is that currently it's not really being done. And there are challenges about, how to really properly integrate those kind of considerations in risk management. It's under development. And in a way, I think nowadays everybody agrees that risks stemming from environmental and climate-related changes, as well as societal developments. I mean, let's look even at the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine. I mean, it has deep implications on, economy, on financial returns, and hence has to be taken into consideration, and not only from the point of view of actually here investments, so returns, for shareholders, but also basically purely from, common sense business decision-making to ensure that basically companies and boards, board members in particular, but also the management of the companies, they actually consider all this kind of different ESG, or what is now more broadly referred to as sustainability risks, as it may have actually very direct financial implications. And if this is something that is not going to be considered, we may actually face another financial significant crisis, which has been already recognized by the European Banking Authority, by EIOPA, so the Pensions and Insurance Authority, as well as by the European Central Bank. So overall, basically now, I would say, I think luckily enough, there is more and more consensus and acknowledgement that these risks, it's not only about actually doing good. It's not only about saving the planet. It's not only about saving the society. The reality is that if we destroy our planet, businesses won't be able to make money anymore. So we need to protect what we have. And actually, something that I have my colleagues working on is the so-called doom loop argumentation, showing actually the interconnection between sustainability risks, so ESG risks, so those risks which have a direct financial materiality, and between the environmental and social impacts. And that while, of course, from the kind of financial perspective, companies and financial institutions should primarily look maybe at the sustainability risks, but in reality, they also have to consider the impacts, because those impacts might in the future become sustainability risks. So there is a loop, and there is, kind of interconnection, and it's kind of a self-reinforcing, vicious circle. And maybe just to mention that what I have observed, in terms of, I would say, development at the regulatory arena of the terms, is that I think now more and more, we're moving away from talking only about non-financial information. ESG is still, very much present there, especially when we talk about risk management. But more and more, there is actually move towards the term sustainability risks. So these are seen, as more, yes, with the impact, with the financial materiality, and then the impacts or the adverse impacts on environment and society, and hence the double materiality that has been referred to before. So maybe moving on, to the next slide there. I do hope you have heard about IPCC reports. It's basically the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and basically it was set up by United Nations, and it is composed of 270 experts from 67 countries who are constantly evaluating the climate change and the impacts on different places of our planet. And also they are analyzing what are the economic and financial implications. Basically, one of the, I think, most famous reports was dated from a couple of years ago. However, they actually do now quite frequent, updates, adding some new information. And I think some aspects, just, to highlight, because it's the latest one published actually, I think 1.5 months ago or so. It's quite long, it's 300 pages, but maybe just to share a couple of highlights. Climate impacts are already more widespread and severe than expected. Climate change is already causing widespread disruption in every region in the world, with just 1.1 degrees of warming. The remaining carbon budget of our planet, so basically whatever we can use before the planet is destroyed, is basically only about the same size as CO2 emissions of the last decade. Aiming for 1.5 Celsius requires, so basically the Paris Agreement goal, coal use to, well, aiming for 1.5 requires coal use to drop by 95%, oil by 60%, and gas by 45% by 2050. Current rates of CCS deployment are far below those in model pathways. We are locked into even worse impacts from climate change in the near term, because this is another problem. You know, so many people, they actually say like, oh, the climate change and environmental degradation, this is not for now, this is for the future generation. This is not true, because actually the latest science shows that if we don't deal with it now, there won't be good future for the next generation. Even if the world rapidly decarbonizes, greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere and current emission trends will make some very significant climate impacts unavoidable through 2040. The IPCC estimates that in the next decade alone, climate change will drive 32 to 132 million more people into extreme poverty. Global warming will jeopardize food security, as well as increase the incidence of heat-related mortality, heart disease, and mental health challenges. Now, focusing a little bit more actually on the financial and economic impacts, something which is worthwhile flagging is, from the insurance perspective, it becomes more difficult to find financial actors willing to provide insurance, for instance, for real estate in relation to flood and wildfires in California. Probabilities of extreme but plausible scenarios are increasing. Stranded fossil fuel assets, so basically, yes, stranded fossil fuel assets is one of the very big problems, because now, with where we are at, actually, and also new changes and regulations coming in, there is a huge risk that if financial actors still keep investing to such a heavy degree in fossil fuel assets, that they will soon become stranded, meaning basically they won't be able to sell them anymore because they will significantly lose their value. Stranded fossil fuel assets are estimated at 4 to 15 trillion, with climate policies to achieve the 2 Celsius degrees target. This actually may reach staggering $185 trillion till 2115 using combined social and private discount rate. And last but not least, despite all this, 60 largest banks provided $3.8 trillion to fossil fuel companies since 2016, despite the fact that this topic has been on the table for already quite some time, despite the Paris Agreement in 2015. Banking on Climate Chaos, International Monetary Fund estimated fossil subsidies totaling $5.2 trillion, or 6.5% of global GDP, in 2017, compared with 3 to 6% GDP only to be invested annually into low-carbon solutions until 2050. So basically, the conclusion is that despite all these challenges and all these risks, businesses and financial institutions do not really transition. They don't really take it seriously, don't take the action to actually transition their business into more sustainable. Now, I'm sorry. Sorry, 2 PowerPoints. Anyway, so now a little bit of fun. Yes, just a couple of actually visualizations of, you know, where probably we are at. Yeah, and the focus of the society as well as policymakers and politicians. So yes, everybody, you know, is so concerned about COVID, which of course is a big problem. Then, you know, the recession behind it, of course, is also a very big problem. But in reality, the climate change is the biggest problem, but people just prefer not to see that. So yes, and then basically the focus is be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. And I think, you know, what we could probably add to this image here is also somewhere the war in Ukraine. Yes, another little, you know, thing for fun. So a little bit, to show what frequently happens, with regards to, I would say, business perspective. I used to agree with you that climate change was real until I found out how much it would cost to fix it. Although it's a pity they don't think about it, how much it will cost if it's not fixed. But that's a long-term problem, which unfortunately often is disregarded. Now, a little bit of a reflection also on disclosures. I don't know how many of you have heard about EU taxonomy, which is a tool that is designed and intended to measure, to create a kind of a definition, a sort of a dictionary of what investments can qualify as environmentally sustainable, and it's basically being still developed. And well, of course, this is a very good initiative. The problem is that businesses have very much been rejecting and lobbying against the idea of also creating the so-called brown taxonomy, so defining what are significantly harmful economic activities. So while of course it's very good to define those who are actually sustainable, we probably also need to know those activities that either need to be immediately ceased or they need to be transformed. So yes, here is also just a little graphic about that. And okay, just 2-3 more, I promise. But I couldn't stop myself of using actually a couple of those comic stripes that Finance Watch actually developed. So yes, a little bit, the attitude of companies, lawmakers, and investors. Companies, it's really too complex to measure my climate impacts. Lawmakers, let's not overburden companies. Reporting should be flexible. Investors, I cannot tell how much fossil I'm financing if companies don't report their impact. And well, the vicious circle continues. Now, this is one of my also favorite ones. This is with regards to actually not incorporating and integrating ESG or sustainability risks in risk management. And basically, as you know, basically financial institutions, they need to be supervised by financial supervisors with regard to how they actually deal with risk management. The problem is that the traditional risk management does not incorporate sustainability risks, which are one of the risks and hence should be incorporated. And basically what is happening currently is that, yes, they're just, playing with the fossil risks while the financial supervisor is looking elsewhere. Okay, and now the last one before I move on to more serious topics. Not that this one is not. Okay, so yes, just to actually, and this is connected indeed to the topic also of sustainable corporate governance, where basically one of the criticisms has been that basically there is a lot of short-termism in capital markets. And basically, investors also tend to often focus on short-term and financial gains, and that in reality, in business decision-making, unfortunately, there is a tendency to think quite short-term also. And yes, and basically just to demonstrate, what happens sometimes on stock markets. Now, moving on. So indeed, today I'm supposed to focus on sustainable corporate governance, although I think these are all very interrelated issues and important ones. I must say I will have... Yes. I must say I will have to challenge you a little bit, Ian, on what you said, that... integration or, consideration of sustainability in corporate governance is not necessarily the best way forward, or maybe that there is too much impact, or need, to integrate it to that end. I think the reality is the reason why it is happening and why it has to happen is because the purpose of corporate governance is to somehow ensure, it has main influence on how companies are led, governed, and managed. And the issue is that sustainability has indeed become one of the very big concerns, and therefore it is important that it is properly incorporated as one of the different various aspects that need to be considered into the business decision making and strategic thinking. Well, given that I have already exploited most of my time, I'll just give a very quick overview. I mean, in terms of the background, I'm not going to bore you with that, but the Commission basically has been already pondering for the last couple of years on an initiative, regulatory initiative on sustainable corporate governance. Eventually, there has been a lot of heavy business lobbying, and also by some of the countries, especially the Nordics, against that, because the argument has been always like, oh, company law, corporate governance, this is something which is a member state's competence, and therefore EU should not really interfere. However, I think, at the end of the day, this can be challenged because this is all evolving. In reality, taxation has been also always a member state competence. However, we have already seen certain initiatives in that area at EU level as well. And the fact that something has been done in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean that cannot be in the future or now. And maybe referring back to what Einstein said, you can't solve the problem using the same type of thinking you used when you created a problem. So I think given the current situation and context, I think we do need to change the way we actually legislate. We need to change the way we do business. So in February, finally, Commission made that proposal for a directive on sustainable corporate due diligence. And basically, large companies, according to this proposal, will be required to do mandatory due diligence through value chain. And actually, the main focus of the proposal is really on mandatory due diligence, which, even though is related to corporate governance, it's still quite, you can say, a separate matter. However, luckily, some aspects of the corporate governance, sustainable corporate governance, remained. So there are three main articles with regards to that. Article 15, which is which introduces provisions on combating climate change, including possibly linking directors' remuneration, variable remuneration, with sustainability targets. Then there is Article 25 dealing with directors' duty of care, so that basically, while acting in the long-term interest of the company, that directors should also consider other stakeholders and sustainability-related aspects. And last but not least, Article 26 also includes actually directors' duties with regards to overseeing due diligence, as well as adjusting corporate strategy to take into account the actual and potential adverse impacts. And I would say this is, quite a big change. Let's hope that actually the negotiations will ensure that these key proposals will remain or even further evolve in a positive way, because indeed ensuring that companies set sustainability targets, and in particular climate targets, and that they report on an ongoing basis on their pathways to achieving those targets, and that investors also can see the information whether indeed the companies are progressing on those targets, ideally towards the Paris Agreement, is very important. But anyway, I'll stop here. And, well, I guess, we can share the slides in case if you'd like to, I would say, consider further Article 15. But in any case, this is also available in the Commission proposal. And, yeah, looking forward to any questions later on and the discussion maybe with panelists. Sorry, I've taken too much time.